Hey everybody, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and in today's video I'm going to talk about two DAC amps from FiiO. The first is the K19, which is a $1,300 DAC amp that came out from FiiO last year. It has a ton of power and even more features. The other is the FiiO K17, which just came out, sells for just over $900, and has a lot to love, including a touchscreen and a somewhat vintage look. Now this is going to be a very long video, but out of respect for your wallet and your time, I didn't want to skip over some of the more in-depth testing, because if you're looking at this video because you are legitimately considering purchasing something like this, I really wanted to cover as much as I can. And if you only care about certain aspects of it, I will have chapters in the description below to again help save you some time. I think each chapter have their own relevance, especially in this price point. They're there for a reason, but feel free to use that to save yourself some time. Now, FiiO did send these to me for review. It will not affect what I say about it. I have no monetary exchange with them. It's not sponsored in any way. And I also do not participate in any marketing or affiliate programs with FiiO. I don't believe in that stuff, and I don't want you to ever think that money was in any way influencing what I had to say about these. Now, I have to say that right off the bat, I love the look of the FiiO K17. It has just the right amount of vintage to it. I feel like I just need to plug this in on my desk and go put on short circuit.
Error. Grasshopper disassemble.
I know looks are subjective, of course, but I do love that FiiO is making a less traditional amp design. I'm personally all for it, and that was a huge selling point for me. Now, it's available in silver or black, but I personally like the silver for my own tastes. The K19, also available in black or silver, has a much more modern, even sinister look to it, especially in the optional vertical orientation. Either way, they both have a unique design language that kind of bucks the trend of traditional looking audio gear. But we all know looks aren't everything, so let's take a closer look at what FiiO thinks justifies the $900 to $1,300 price tag. Now, when it comes to navigating the FiiO K17, it has a giant 3.93-inch touchscreen. It's giant in comparison to many other amp DACs out there, and when it was touch, I thought I had to just tap it a certain way to interact with it. Well, in case you get one, the easiest way to control the gestures is if you swipe from left to right, that pulls up your menu with all of your features, and if you swipe from right to left, that's how you pull up your input selection. You can change the play mode from single play to repeat, choose from a huge list of EQ options, including 10 custom EQ profiles. But in order to customize those 10 profiles, you have to use the FiiO DSP app. Now, the DSP app works on PC and Mac. There is also a Bluetooth version that works on Android and iOS, but that version only works on the K19 so far. FiiO has promised support for this coming in sometime in April, if all goes to plan, but I never want to make the suggestion or purchase decision off of what's being promised or what could be. Just know right now that the only way to customize the K17 is through USB. Now, the menu also allows you to set a hard volume limit, but I recommend using the gain knob for that. The menu also allows you to adjust the left and right balance, so if you have a listening imbalance, you can address that. There's a network connection settings, including the on-screen UI to browse your local Wi-Fi and enter a password via the on-screen keyboard. Now, obviously being a sub 4-inch screen, the keyboard's going to be a little bit small, but I didn't really have any issues navigating it, and it's certainly much more convenient than dealing with a knob to scroll through a large series of characters for devices that don't have touchscreen. You can also adjust the screen brightness, the screen sleep timer, RGB settings for the volume knobs, including knob brightness, including a breathing mode, a handful of pre-selected color options, similar to what the K19 and the top logo of the K11s give you as far as RGB color choices. There's also a theme setting where you can customize the looks, or at least I assume customize the looks of the screen, but as of right now, there's no additional themes to choose from. This is a full color screen, but it has like that vintage kind of amber color to it. I hope they add this in future updates, but as of right now, that's the only look you get. You can also enable or disable the 12-volt trigger, adjust screen idle time, and get this, you can even toggle between UAC 2 and UAC 1 mode. So why is that so cool? Well, I'm so glad you asked. So UAC 1 mode allows you to connect to some legacy devices and game consoles. You can plug either of these into a PlayStation 5 or Nintendo Switch, for example, allowing you to use basically an endgame level amp DAC on console for gaming with all of the other features I will be talking about. As far as other settings go, you can change the device language and even navigate through your firmware updates. For the K17, this is a new unit, so I'm still operating on the original firmware update. I couldn't find any links online to change it or address it because there were a couple bugs with this guy, so all of this is based off the launch firmware. Now, the two bugs I do have are somewhat minor, and I don't know if one of them can be fixed, and I hope the other one can be fixed, but it's not game breaking. So when this thing is turned on, you obviously have your adjustable gains and ability to change how the output mode works on the K17. You have the ability to have preamp mode on the back plus the headphone output. You can go to headphone only, preamp output on the back, which allows you to use this volume wheel to adjust the voltage output of both the XLR and RCA outputs. And then you can do line out mode, which sends the rear output at full voltage, which is 2.5 for single-ended and 5 volts for XLR. The bug that I had, if you are in low gain mode and you are set to output your audio to your headphone, and then you switch to preamp mode, when you go back to headphone mode, that will then increase your gain somewhere between high and super high. It doesn't match either of them, but toggling the gain settings instantly fixes the issue. This bug where the gain gets changed depending on output mode only affects it if you're in low gain mode initially. If you're on medium and above, nothing gets affected by it. Now this has a digital volume encoder. It's not an analog potentiometer. Because of that, one, I prefer this in a lot of cases, especially if you use this for IEMs, because at very low output levels, you don't have any kind of channel imbalance issues. It's also very quiet to adjust. You don't have any static noises from changing it. Now, because you have this much control, I never felt the need to use low gain mode. Even on medium with 100 volume steps on this particular device, and this one goes over 100, it's the same idea with the digital encoder. I didn't need to ever operate in low gain mode. So this bug isn't like an ongoing problem for me. It's just worth pointing out, and I do hope they fix it. The other thing that was cool is this has a VU meter. Now, as the whole vintage look, this is another big selling point. I think it's super cool. There's two problems with it. If you use this as a USB DAC, which the majority of people that get these types of amp DACs use it for, the VU meter does not work. It just doesn't give you the option to enable it. Hopefully that gets addressed. And if you are able to use the VU meter, right now the frame rate is rather slow. The screen seems to operate anywhere from like 24 to 40 hertz for a refresh rate. It doesn't, unless it's just the UI causing it to feel a little bit slower. But the screen does refresh faster than what the VU meter suggests. They are very choppy, seemingly being like 10 frames per second or even lower. So it doesn't really look good in my opinion, and as a result, I didn't end up using the VU meters for pretty much anything. Now the amount of input options you have on the K17 is absurd. It has 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi support, as well as a 1 gigabit RJ45 LAN connection. Because this works as a streamer, not full streamer, you don't have the ability to use something like Tidal Connect, but it does support Bluetooth streaming, including LDAC and aptX support, and it works with Apple AirPlay. The K17 is also Roon ready, and if you're familiar with Roon and how powerful that is, this is an awesome feature to have. This doesn't have a 12-volt trigger output though, it only has an input. So the only downside with this particular configuration is if you are using this as your Roon source and you cast to it and turn it on, it would have been nice to turn on your amplifier with it if you weren't using it for headphones and using this as a preamp for speakers. Now this also has a local media player built in, and at first, me not really thinking about what I was doing, I used a USB-C flash drive. I plugged it into the front because I was thinking that was the input for media. That is also a USB DAC connection on the front of the unit. So you can use the front or the back USB connection. There's only one DAC built in, so you're using one or the other, but there is a USB-A port on the back of the K17, and that's where it can read your local media. The media player shows you the file bit depth info, track info, allows you to shuffle play, favorite your favorite songs, playlist support, and of course it supports the VU meters. The remote also provides additional controls for the local playback and when using it for streaming, because you have play, pause, forward and back a track, and then you can also change some inputs and favorite your things using that FN1 button. There's also a 4.4 millimeter balanced input on the back, coaxial and optical inputs and outputs, single-ended RCA inputs and outputs, and a pair of balanced XLR outputs. Now moving on to the front of the K17, it's amazing. I obviously pointed out why I liked the style in the first place, and then the screen itself is quite functional and looks crisp. It even has a really good viewing angle, so if you're off axis, it doesn't fade or lose contrast, making it very easy to see regardless of how you look at it. I do like that they have physical knobs for this. It makes adjusting certain controls much easier. The big advantage of the K17 over the 19 is the controls. It's just far more convenient between having a touchscreen and more dedicated buttons. And then as far as the output goes, they have the same thing. They have a 4.4 millimeter Penticon connection, the XLR balanced outputs, and then you also have a 1/4 inch or 6.3 millimeter single-ended output. Now both the K17 and K19 have a dedicated USB 232 Type-C input on the back. This is what's used for all of the DSP software and adjustment that you can do to customize the onboard parametric EQ. If you are connecting either of these to your PC and you want to adjust the DSP via PC, you have to use both USB-C cables. Now it does come with 2 cables in the box on both models. Just keep that in mind that it'll take up a couple ports. Both the K17 and 19 also feature a gain lift switch, so if you have any noise issues on the outputs, you can always flick that switch and it'll fix that. I recommend leaving it it on, but if you have an issue, at least they give you that option. Now the K19 loses a couple connectivity options that the K17 has, but it also gains a couple. It too has optical and coaxial inputs and outputs. It has a 12-volt trigger input as well, but it also has a 12-volt trigger output. The K19 lacks any network support, so no AirPlay or Roon support here, but it does still have Bluetooth, including LDAC and aptX support. Aside from having double the output power in balanced mode at 32 ohms, which is just absurd, the other big difference that the K19 has is the HDMI inputs and outputs at the top. So FiiO rates the HDMI input as a 4K 60Hz input, so you would think HDMI 2.0. Now I did connect my Xbox Series X to this, which on the input, and then ran the HDMI output to an LG OLED TV. The Xbox said that I was outputting and the display supported 4K 120 Hz along with HDR, automatic low latency mode, and VRR. So I didn't lose anything by going through this. And just to confirm that, on my LG television, I turned on the game mode and I looked at the on-screen display, and the TV still said it was getting 4K 120. So FiiO is saying it only works at 4K 60. I'm going to say that that's what they're supporting, but my particular setup, both on the console and the TV, actually showed it working at 120. Now, not everyone's going to need that, but it's cool to know that at least it worked in this application. However, the HDMI output also works as an ARC connection, which is typically a safer solution because it's not just for the input. In order to use HDMI input, you have to select it as one of your sources on the unit. But if you are using ARC, the advantage to that is if you want to watch any show on your TV using apps, regardless of console, whether it's Xbox or PlayStation 5, you can take advantage of ARC, or audio return channel, to send the sound from your TV, anything it's showing, to this amp. The other fallback, if you can't or do not want to use ARC or HDMI, these both have optical inputs. Now, I use that for multiple televisions and my PC to test jitter performance, latency, etc. I had no issues running optical. Obviously, the bandwidth is going to be a little bit different than what USB supports, but with the HDMI option, obviously it's great for one option, but with optical, I was able to use my Xbox with either of these as well and get crystal clear sound. So if you're looking for like more of an end game solution for gaming, these are great for that. They also give you that whole thing with custom parametric EQ. The downside is obviously they have no mic support, so just keep that in mind. Now, kind of similar to the volume on the K17 to turn the screen off, the top button here also toggles the screen on the K19, so you can put it to sleep if you want. Now, neither of these turn off the RGB on the volume wheels. You have to disable that through the menu. This bottom wheel does a lot of things. One, it can be used to change your source, but it's also how you navigate the menu, which volume down or rotating it counterclockwise makes it go down. I thought it would have been the other way around. The other thing that's kind of a pain is there's no quick exit, so once you activate the menu, you can't just hit one button to get back out. You have to keep scrolling down until you get to the back arrow at the bottom of each menu or sub-menu until you can finally escape. Now, the K19 also comes with a remote, and they look similar in shape. You can tell it's the same button system, they're just encoded differently. Because this one has HDMI, the left side is changing those controls, and then you lose the play-pause functions, and they give you quicker ways to adjust your inputs. So because this doesn't have touch, I like that they gave you some options for the input control here, because that does save you some time. Just like the K17, the K19 allows you to select a bunch of their own in-house made EQ profiles for different genres, as well as 10 different custom EQ profiles that you would make using the DSP app. You can also adjust your gain levels from low to ultra high, change your output modes between your headphone mode or preamp, etc., change your max volume limit, choose your audio filters, change screen settings, and of course the UAC mode. Again, providing UAC 1 support for things like consoles. There's also a menu setting to change the orientation of the screen because the K19 works in vertical or horizontal mode. I like the idea of vertical mode just because to me it's a unique selling point, and it comes with this plastic like headphone mount, if you will, on top, so you can rest your headphone on it. This does get a little bit warm, but it's well ventilated. So I think this design is super cool. The only thing I will say about these feet, which are metal, they are quite heavy and they feel very robust, is by having these little feet on the corners, it doesn't have the same grip as the K17 has. So depending on your desk surface material, especially if it's not a glossy desk, when you insert different terminal, like an XLR or balance connection, even the quarter, anytime I did that on one of my desks, it just makes this amp move around a little bit easier than I would have liked. I wish there was something that could have been done to make the friction higher, because the K17 being slightly heavier and stuck in this horizontal mode, it doesn't seem to move as much, which is a little quality of life thing, but it's worth pointing out. So now that we know far too many technical details on either unit and the feature set, let's get into sound quality. And on paper, the K19 has double the output power in balance mode. It can be pretty absurd, especially in 32 ohms, but in real life, both of these have a lot of power, and both of these have almost an overkill amount of power for most safe listening volumes and most traditional output gear, different headphones and IEMs. Now, I have a Susvara Unveiled. I don't have a Modhouse Tungsten, but the Tungsten is an example of something that kind of screams and yearns for more power. On the Susvara Unveiled, even in a standard 1/4 inch mode or single-ended mode, unbalanced, lower output power, both of these still got more than loud enough for my own personal taste. Some people will make the case about current because some planar headphones love current. This still sounded fantastic with either of these, and if I wanted more juice, obviously the balance mode is going to give me that. So as far as its sonic signature and sound quality goes, this is the most difficult thing to explain on a subjective level. And even on an objective level, when you start measuring things, they get into these thresholds and limits that are so far beyond what human hearing is. There's a lot of those question marks and placebo of what we actually hear. Now, I can tell you that both of these have a dead silent noise floor, and even in high gain mode at high volume levels on very sensitive gear like IEMs, it's silent. There's also no weird coloration or brightness or tubey goodness. It's a very clean Delta Sigma digital DAC amp solution. Now, I constantly A/B these against each other for days. Like, I've been working on this since I got the K17 amp, frankly, because I've just been so excited about the looks of this and what these have offered. And this was on the back burner for a little bit, but I'm glad I waited because now I can talk about both together. I also made sure the output power matched using a calibrated SPL meters to ensure that toggling back and forth didn't introduce a volume change, because that can obviously change our perceptions on sound quality. And it's interesting how these perform. So the K19 sounds a tad darker and a tad more centered and concise. I know this has the THX topology amplification system. It's a different amp structure, and these have always had a dead silent noise floor. They're very power efficient, especially for the output power. That's part of why this thing can have 8 watts at 32 ohms in balance mode. But I found that when I was A/Bing, the thing that stood out the most, one of the few things that stood out, was if a note had to be perfectly dead center, this particular amp kind of did that more. It also seemed to have a slightly faster decay, so a note would end sooner. Whereas this, using an AKM system, it's a different AB transistor array amp topology. This one seemed to have just a slightly wider, a little bit more lively presentation, but not like a bright sibilant thing. And it's so minor. I can tell you, I'm not doing this to say that just trust me or anything like that. I A/B these for hours, and it gets to a point where you start trying to find a difference. When you have an AKM DAC versus an ESS DAC or even a Cirrus Logic one, that doesn't guarantee a certain sound signature. All of these other things that the designers put into the amp design itself, having isolated PCBs inside, that's something they do with both of these, so there's less interference and crosstalk issues. There's a lot of things that can impact the sound quality. All I can say is what I noticed is this sounded a little bit closer to my personal preference of how I expect certain tones to kind of ring out when I'm playing different tracks. It just sounded slightly wider, whereas this one sounded a little bit more just slightly compressed, but very well centered and very, very clean. It sounds darker, I guess, because it's slightly compressed, but it's not darker from like a treble standpoint. It's kind of splitting hairs, and if you don't have the ability to A/B these for hours on end, days at a time, you're not going to be dissatisfied with either of these, in my opinion. I personally lean towards this after doing all my testing, but again, I don't know how many people will come to the same conclusion. Some of this gets into the whole placebo area, so we don't want to lie to ourselves and say I'm hearing certain things that I don't. If you hear it and you're able to A/B test, obviously pick which one you like the most. I also loosely compared these to the K11, both the standard Cirrus Logic DAC and then their R2R, which are amazing amp DACs in the sub $200 range. The original K11 that I reviewed had the Cirrus Logic DAC, and the default filter it shipped with to me sounded a little bit bright. I didn't talk about filter changes with these because the difference is pretty much beyond what human hearing is. It can change trailing tones a bit, and you might have a different maximum frequency roll-off between the two, or between different filter choices. These to me sounded fine in the default filter. I didn't feel I had to change them. On the K11, I had to switch mine to filter 1. It sounded a little bit smoother that way. I don't know what it was about the default one, but it was more noticeable with IEMs. And it was still very clean, super resolving for the price. These are super clean, super resolving, but didn't have that same kind of faint shrillness issue that I had with the K11. The R2R edition is fantastic. The vocal presentation and mid-range is awesome on that, but it didn't sound as resolving as these. So I think what really starts to make higher end amp DACs like this make more sense for the cost is when you look at the rest of the feature set. It's not purely paying for 5 times the sound quality, especially if you don't need all of that extra output power. A lot of new stuff nowadays, even in the sub $200 range, as we've seen with other products, both from FiiO and other brands, still perform great. These have a lot of special features to them that make them unique. So part of what you're paying for beyond sound is the input-output capability, the touchscreen, the balanced outputs on the back, the onboard 21 or 31 band parametric EQ support with 10 different custom profiles. These are a lot of things that you're paying for. Both of these, of course, have the onboard DSP for the 31 band parametric EQ and other features, but this uses a 340 megahertz clock, whereas this has a femtosecond oscillator, which is not a cheap chip, and it's an in-house design chip running at 800 megahertz as well. So there's a little bit better processing power on this guy. From what I could tell, making audible adjustments on parametric EQ using the FiiO DSP app, I didn't hear any real changes to it, or differences in performance, I should say. So on the note of FiiO DSP, there's some things they did great with this. One, the power of 31 bands of parametric EQ is insane. It's way overkill for most people, especially if a lot of people don't fully understand what they're changing on parametric EQ. So you can gain and reduce decibels for different frequencies that you pick. Parametric EQ allows you to target an exact frequency. So if you want to adjust 63 hertz, you can do that. You can adjust the Q factor, which is how widely or narrow you adjust 63 hertz, and the tones that precede it and follow it. So if you're looking at various octaves along a frequency response, if you go with a really small Q factor, which the minimum on both of these is 0.4, that will widely address frequencies around 64 hertz, I think I said, or 61 hertz. If you go with a high Q, which these for some reason go all the way up to 128 Q, that is so narrow. I've never ever had to go beyond like 7 or 8 for my Q factor, but they give you that. The gain adjustment is quite robust as well. You can go up to plus 12 decibels or minus 24 decibels. So there's a lot of power you're getting and paying for with these units. You also have the ability to export your EQ profiles. So you can use this to send and share to other FiiO owners of either of these products, where they can then import the XML file. Because it uses XML, if you're using things like SquigLink or doing auto EQ, it doesn't just import a traditional text file, so you can't use those auto EQ functions. However, once you kind of start dialing it in and save your own, it's still better than nothing, and I think it's pretty feature rich, of course. So the reason why they allow you to export it, not only for sharing, but as much as having 10 profiles is a lot, if you want to have more than 10, well, you can just import and save them how you want. Maybe you have 2 of these and you want to, cross-pollinate different EQ profiles, you can easily do that. In addition to the wildly powerful 31-band parametric EQ, you also have the ability to adjust your dynamic range and compression and a limiter. So yes, there is a compressor option built into the DSP as well, which will affect gaming, of course. This is pretty crazy depending on what content you're listening to. If you need to tighten up the dynamic range a bit, it's a very complex set of adjustments. It's not like it's just a single slider that says low high. You have to adjust your attack, decay, and thresholds. But once you've dialed it into your own personal likings and your source that you're listening to, it's insanely powerful. So when it comes to gaming performance, I would argue that this is effectively some of the best gaming amp DACs you can buy if you don't need native mic support. That's the big asterisk. If you want things like game to chat mix, and if you need a microphone input, that's obviously going to rule these out. But the clean output power, if you don't need microphone support, and the onboard parametric EQ can be truly game changing for people. This means that when you use this connected to a game console or connected to your television, Xbox owners and PlayStation owners can benefit from all of these features. Of course, PC players can as well, and that's typically where you would have your microphone solution if you have a dedicated mic, but this then allows you to focus on areas of the game that matter. You can have custom 1 being your first-person shooter profile, and then custom 2 being your profile for immersive and single-player gaming, and then custom 3 is your special headphone that has a totally different sound signature and requires its own EQ. So it's really cool that you can do all that regardless of gaming or music. And because of that whole compressor setting I mentioned before, that means even PlayStation users can now effectively get loudness EQ, which was a huge setting almost exclusive to PC. With Xbox, you can use the Dolby app for some of the loudness compression, but this allows you to tighten up your dynamic range even for gaming. So now console players can get advantage of that tighter window, making footsteps louder and making airstrikes and gunshots more quiet. Crazy good features to have. Now, obviously, because these have USB support for console, they have optical, they have HDMI options on the K19, you have a lot of different ways you can connect your gear, so it's super versatile and you don't have to worry about what platform you have. As far as overall feedback, at the end of the day, these are not cheap, and I understand that that's not going to be for everybody. There are a couple things I wasn't crazy about. The encoders on both of these have the exact same issue where if you spin the encoder wheel too fast, it doesn't adjust the volume super fast and it tends to skip back a couple steps once in a while. So a medium speed for adjusting your volume is technically the fastest. The remotes obviously have no issues, but I wish they did something with the firmware to, I guess, either tighten up the tolerances or change the encoder performance. That was one little thing. As far as heat and stability and all that goes, I already mentioned some of the bugs with the K17. I didn't really have any bugs with this guy. They both get warm, but not like crazy hot, and I think the build quality is great. They have sharper edges with a metal enclosure, so keep that in mind. If you accidentally tip this over or don't put it on your desk carefully, you could scratch or damage the surface area. So just kind of handle this with care. Overall, they do feel like a very premium product though. So I know that is a lot to digest. I knew this was going to be a long video, but I really hope this helped answer some questions between the two. I think sonically, when you get into this performance, again, the performance window is very, very narrow. It really comes down to design, feature set, I/O, connectivity, etc. Do you need HDMI and more power? Do you need network support? That's where they start to differentiate with each other. I think these are incredible products. FiiO's just been killing it lately. I'm personally in love with the 17 just from the looks, and some people are going to pay for that alone. So I hope you found this video helpful. If there was an aspect of either the behavior or performance of either of these that I missed that you were curious about, drop a comment below. I'll do my best to answer that for you, and hopefully we can get everyone on the same page. So thank you so much for watching and making it to the end. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe so I can see you at the next video. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.